very happy to see him thriving this season.
So let's get into yesterday's news a little bit deeper. Ron Roberts and also Ronnie Wheat, both fired by Baylor. These are two Dave Aranda hires. Now, I know everybody is a hire, and then sometimes you retain maybe who was on the staff prior to that. That's something that Aranda had to look at. That's something that right now at Nebraska, Matt Rule's having to look at. Have not yet seen anybody who has actually been retained. In fact, by the way, Ed Foley, who was a part of his staff at Temple, he was an interim head coach at Temple, and then was on Matt Rule's staff. He was here at Baylor. He now is a part as the special teams coach at Nebraska. So this is part of the deal. But here's the story. Ron Roberts, remember, was someone that was, when older, was a part of Dave Aranda's, like, picking his brain. And so this one here is someone like blood. Ronnie Wheat was someone that worked when LSU, of course, had Aranda, and he worked on the same staff. So that's also someone that Aranda hired. That's how interesting these hires are. We know special teams for Baylor was messed up. The secondary, the backside was messed up. So this was more than just productivity, though. This had to be something where Dave Aranda, and just kind of making some calls or kind of watching the tea leaves, this was one where what Dave Aranda wants, person over player, and what Dave Aranda on a few occasions mentioned about even the staff, when maybe they were not allowing the growth of players, and the one word, and Cole put this in an article today, weaponizing. Remember? About some staff, about whatever. This, to me, goes to show you that this
point in college football right now where, and it's unfortunate for a lot of people, where that, 20 years of loyalty, you have to maybe even know going in that if you don't produce, you got to go, because things move so much faster now. And that, look, if I can get a defensive coordinator in here that can help me get, a couple of higher star recruits and then 4 or 5 transfers that can flip a side of the ball really quick, then you kind of have to do that. Because, again, the trains are always on the tracks now in college football. There's no, sitting around and waiting like, oh, we'll get our coach later, signing days later. You can't do it. You have 2 signing days you have to deal with. You have the transfer portal you have to deal with twice during the year now. You have all that, recruiting your own roster. You just can't let things fester, and you got to move. And it really sucks because there are some things that you're going to have to let go of somebody who's been with you a long time.
I mean, Ron Roberts was a mentor, had been so for a really long time. That was a guy who Dave Aranda learned a lot from and learned under the wing of, and then decides under his first head coaching job to bring him on board as his defensive coordinator. I think that is obviously was a very strong connection. Ronnie Wheat was, as I saw somebody who seemed to know Aranda pretty well, his attaché. Basically his right-hand guy for many years, going back to LSU. He loses Matthew Pallage to Oregon as a co-DC, and that's the call he makes, knowing how important special teams and safeties were to his defense and to his team, special teams. That's the direction that he goes. Aranda's very particular, and those were the guys that he selected. So I think that he's not somebody who makes a move without putting some serious thought into it. And so I think that to go and select those guys, given the past relationships that they had, there's obviously deep ties there. And so to make the moves he did yesterday, he obviously put some deep thought into it. And to make those moves, I'm sure, were not easy, but they were not without, a lot of, I'm sure, brainstorming and reflection and questioning and all those different types of things. So if Dave Aranda felt that he needed to cut ties with a guy who's basically been his right-hand guy for years now and who he brought in to fill some big spots, and the guy who was his mentor at one point in time and is part of the reason why he is where he is, then I think that doesn't really need an explanation. That goes without saying that was a tough call, and that goes without saying that that was a tough decision for him to have to make, and I'm sure a tough conversation for him to have. So, big balls move, and what you have to do, because otherwise you don't do that, and you end up in a situation where you're not basically set in stone no matter what you do, like Ferentz is in Iowa, where he can have the heat of, the OC's not working out. He can kind of stem that tide a little bit because of his track record. Dave Aranda doesn't have that track record in Waco. As beloved as he already is, he can't afford to just kind of wallow for more than a year or two. He's got to win games. He has to. That's the standard. That's what you have to do in this environment. And so, if you bring in close people, sometimes you got to get rid of close people, and that's the risk that you run when you do that. So that's the risk that he ran, And unfortunately, it worked out one year with one of those guys, and this year it didn't work out.
And I can promise you this is not a decision he came to, like, rapidly.
No, this wasn't
because,
this is one he probably started having some thoughts maybe even 2 months ago.
Dave Aranda is the kind of thoughtful person, though, that if you were eating with him at a restaurant, you'd have to tell the waiter, like, come back in a few minutes. He's still really thinking about what he wants, because he is a very thoughtful person who carries out things.
You can be thoughtful but still be cold-blooded in a way with decisions you have to make. Well, he's now made staff changes his first 3 years as a head coach, though. And I made this comment yesterday. There was some debate about it. Yes, he's a first-time head coach. This is now year 3, and I said this about coordinators. The one with Fedora, that made a lot of sense. This one with Roberts, based on this year, possibly, but also that's what he does. If he doesn't think you're going to help them get to a next level going forward, he is not afraid to pull the trigger. But you have to also eventually realize these were his hires. Ron Roberts, as Craig mentioned perfectly, who Ron Roberts was. Ronnie Wheat, same thing. So these are his hires, and you got to start hitting these hires, because the next thing you know, you look around, as I said, and you are the common denominator in a room, especially when it comes to coordinators. And people can disagree with me on that. It doesn't mean I think he's making the wrong decisions. It just means you got to be very careful if you have to keep making these types of decisions. One other note about the story yesterday in theathletic.com, and Paul's got a quarterback transfer note. Max Olson and Mitch Sherman, both great writers of what they do. The story about the 70-some day hunt for a new coach to replace Scott Frost. One of the things that was mentioned is that Dave Aranda reached out to Nebraska. From all of my information, that is not true. That is not true based on agents reaching out. It wasn't that, which could also be covered up. That was not true. I don't know what Trev Alberts may have said, but according to what my sources are telling me is that was never really any kind of a thing that Dave Aranda reached out to Nebraska. And if he did or his agent did, it wouldn't blame him. But that is not what I'm being told from what my sources are telling me. Akron, 22-17, 3